Morning, everyone. So what on earth has the story of David and Goliath got to do with the series that we've been looking at the last couple of weeks? Let's have a look at that passage and pull some points out that we can refer to. If any of you are ancient warfare aficionados, I'm not, but I've watched enough TV film battles in my male-dominated household to recognize a few things. So there are different elements to an army that form an army. There's the cavalry, there's the horsemen and the chariots, and then there's the infantry, the well-armored, trained in hand combat, and that would have been Goliath. And then there's the artillery, which are the archers and the slingshots. They're powerful and accurate, and that would have been possibly where David would have fitted in if he was in the battle. But the goal of the battle is still the same. It's to win the battle. And David didn't step up to do something different, like perhaps mediate or negotiate a truce. It wasn't uncommon, as you heard in that video clip, in warfare tactics in the day to suggest a one-to-one combat to break a stalemate or to save loads of lives being lost. But David steps up and says, "Don't worry about this Philistine. I'll go and fight him." So one man, David, taking on one man, Goliath, wasn't a scenario that had never been heard of before. And Saul, the experienced king and commander of the Israelite army, ridicules David in verse 33. I'm reading from 1 Samuel 17, by the way. Ridicules David, saying, "There's no way you can go and fight this Philistine and possibly win. You're only a boy." And he's been a man, Goliath's been a man of war since his youth. So Saul discounted this boy, this young man, thinking him unable to possibly win, and little did he know. David was then offered Saul's armor to fight the battle with Goliath in the expected way. It's always been done this way. We fight a battle with armor. And in verse 38, Saul gave David his own armor, a bronze helmet and a coat of mail. David put it on and strapped the sword over, and he took a step or two to see what it was like, for he'd never worn things like that before. So that was the practical thing to do. This boy turns up in his shepherd's tunic or something else totally inappropriate for a battle. But it was also a symbolic thing to do. It was symbolic in a way that put Saul's expectations or the expectations of the whole of the Israelite army onto David to sally forth in the old way with the old expectations, or even as a replica of Saul himself wearing Saul's armor. But the armor didn't suit David, and nor did he have the training or the skills or even the strength for close combat with a giant. So he took the armor off after a couple of steps. And in verse 39, he says, "I can't go in these," he protested to Saul. "I'm not used to them." So David took them off. David chose to rely on what he knew best, what was appropriate for his youth, and where his faith lay. He relied on that to win the battle in a different way to that which was expected. So he picked up 5 smooth stones from a stream and put them in his bag, or his pocket. We were having a chat about pockets, really handy pockets. He put them in his bag, and then with his staff and his sling, he crossed the valley to fight the Philistine. And David, not wearing any armor, he could run much faster, be more nimble and agile compared to a giant dressed like a tank, whose army and weapons were so heavy that he even needed someone else to carry his shield. And David is different to both Saul and Goliath. Goliath was a braggart, a show-off, a loudmouth, taunting the Israelites. And Saul was a coward. He didn't step forward for the battle. Both of them trusted in their armor and in their weapons. But David doesn't trust in this armor that isn't his, and it doesn't fit. He trusts in God. And in verse 37, he reassures Saul that the Lord who rescued me from the claws of the lion and the bear will rescue me from this Philistine. It wasn't in the heavy armor or the weapons or the tradition that David relied on. It was his devotion and trust in God that spurred him on. And he said to Goliath in verse 45, "I come to you in the name of the Lord of heaven's armies, the God of the armies of Israel." So I want you to think about a couple of things. What's weighing you down in your own walk with God, or in your mission to others? What's weighing you down? And what does all this mean in the context of us looking through the lens of a minority church? This is the theme that we've been looking through. Ashley, in the last couple of weeks, has explained how the church globally has moved in and out of being in an influential majority status in society to now having more of a minority status. How does this passage help us to consider how we can adjust and embrace what we do? In his book, A Vast Majority, Stuart Murray covers a lengthy observation of the old church. He suggests it's unwieldy, big, complicated, and expensive. And he explains that the Christian community is now a minority in Western societies, whether we like to hear that or not. But a big, unwieldy church makes it unable to be reflexive and nimble and able to change in the face of changing contexts, changing generations, or changing cultures. However beautiful and impressive Saul's armor is, we need something more flexible and better suited to the challenges ahead. And Stuart Murray goes on to explain that whilst today's Christian church is a minority, it's vast. Even if in the UK, for example, only about 10% of people in the population consider themselves to be Christians, that's more than any other category in society. 6 million Christians in the United Kingdom is a vast number and capable of making a big impact, even in the small ways, like Howard mentioned earlier. So without stretching this analogy too far, we might wonder whether we are weighed down by the trappings of the past like David was by Saul's armor. And not just the physical weight of it all, but the expectation that came with it. The armor had served Saul well, and it was a generous gift to David, but it didn't fit David. He felt uncomfortable and hindered by it. And a minority community that used to be a majority faces difficult decisions about the legacy and the past status and the practices that we did in the past. Those of you who've been at AVC a lot longer than me may remember some of these things fondly, or perhaps not so. But it's not to totally nullify the past and the way that we've done things in the past. They were good for the time, and they were right for that situation and context. They were appropriate and fruitful in a previous generation. But some of these things are a weight we can no longer carry. Many of this legacy might once have been life-giving and useful to the community, but are now trappings that weigh us down or distract us or even damage our ability to respond creatively in a context that is changed and is still changing quite rapidly, in fact. We can see examples of this in the context of the Bible. The difference between the Old and the New Testament. Much of the Old Testament, God sets out his law in the form of a covenant with the people of Israel, so that through following his laws, they would have their sins forgiven and are seen as pleasing to God. But when Jesus comes, he brings that new covenant, one in which he has atoned for our sins, and we can enjoy the love of God through his grace and forgiveness. It's not to say that the old covenant was bad. It suited God at that time for those people, and it was good. Jesus explained in Matthew 9, "Men do not put new wine into old wineskins. If they did, the skins would break and the wine would run out. The bags would be no good. They put new wine into new skin bags so that both can be used." The old wineskin, or the old armor, doesn't fit what is new in today's culture. Well, the old covenant had served its purpose, and God has new plans. So what can we do to adjust? And how do we embrace change when reducing activities and limiting commitments can sometimes be interpreted as being defeatist or even possibly regrettable? It's vital to let go of some of these things if we are to avoid burning out for little or no gain. We need to release that energy and flexibility we have and engage creatively with the diverse and changing culture around us. We need to be much more intentional in what we do and waste less time on activities that drain our church and simply don't sustain us. Stuart Murray describes this as moving from being firefighters, dealing with institutional and relational problems, moving to arsonists, inspiring, encouraging, nurturing, creative mission initiatives. I once nearly burned down our family home, neglecting a pan of oil on the stove, so I wouldn't want to be an arsonist in that sense of the word. But wouldn't you rather be at the front, unencumbered by the weight of a heavy, ill-fitting armor, putting out fires of regret or nostalgia, but instead, wouldn't you rather be blazing a trail ahead, lighting a new path to enable a Christian community to thrive and bear witness in a contemporary culture? The week before last, my mum, hi Mum, and I spent a few days in Cumbria, and we went along to the local church for Holy Communion on a Wednesday morning. And we knew it would be a small service, and expecting only a few locals. We were greeted by a very welcoming couple and the vicar, and we were handed a couple of books and invited to sit in the choir area because they knew they weren't expecting many people. And in the end, there was my mum and I and 4 other people. And the vicar appeared from the back of the church, fully robed, and we all stood up, and he processed down the aisle. We sang a hymn, we recited some prayers, we heard a short message and had communion. Well, the bread part only of communion. But all through that service, my heart ached. I don't like to or want to criticize the way other people practice their faith, but I have to admit feeling very uncomfortable throughout that service. Not knowing when to recite what, when to stand up, when to sit down, what are we reading? And to me, it felt like very old armor. The trusty, it's always worked for us armor that once suited a bustling farming community, perhaps hundreds of years ago, but now serves a small handful of people on a rotational basis once a month because of dwindling residences or even dwindling people of faith. And I've been going to church most of my life, so I've been used to different church contexts, different church practices. And I love the Bible, and I love the truth of the words that we read in that service. But I felt, even now thinking about it on reflection, as perhaps David did in the story when he tried on Saul's armor, I'm not used to this armor. It doesn't suit me. It didn't make me comfortable. And I wonder how it would feel if someone who didn't know God, or had never even been to church before, how would they feel coming through that door? And how comfortable would they feel coming through our door? So I've got a few more questions to ask you, but I'm going to do the cringy thing and make you talk to each other. Talk to your neighbor or the person behind you and chat through your answers. So what hinders us? As a church globally, you can talk about that, nationally or even ABC as our church. What are the things that are ill-fitting, unwieldy, or uncomfortable? So turn to your neighbor and have a chat, and I'll give you a couple of minutes. Thanks, everyone. Nice to hear a lot of chatting. If any of you have had any epiphanies and amazing brainwaves, please feel free to email Ashley or me, and just be really interesting to hear your thoughts on what you think is weighing us down. Do you know, we have a huge evangelistic potential if we aren't so ensnared by our internal church programs and responsibilities And that means that we have few relationships with people in our community. And if we discover how to share our faith authentically and sensitively in today's culture, there's a huge amount of evidence that confirms that many people become followers of Jesus because they see Christian faith lived out by someone they know and trust, and not by stepping in a church. So maybe we should even include or even prioritize the capacity of this Christian community to participate in and bless a society in which we are now a minority. Simplifying church or doing church differently, and ensuring that church activities are sustaining rather than draining, might release or encourage many more people to be involved in these ways, and might even encourage those who've been disengaged or never really engaged in the first place to reconnect and find support within the churches for their missional activities. Reaching out to and including all people in our society and not discount the contribution of anyone is crucial. This faithful witness of local congregations is where the credibility might be established and the Christian community can make a creative contribution to the well-being of society. So much of what we're doing in the hub speaks into that. But don't let it be limited to what's going on in the hub. But all this involves change. Change is a scary thing for some more than others. In my work role, I've studied a lot of change management theory, done a lot of change management training, and I lead projects that involve a lot of significant change. And a big aspect of change management theory is understanding that there's going to be some resistance to change. Not all of us like change. I don't mind change. I find it quite exciting, sometimes daunting and unsettling, but I like to look for the opportunities and the positives. There are also theories and models to explain resistance to change, and Kotter's model explains 4 reasons why people are resistant to change. Self-interest, me, this doesn't fit me. Fear and misunderstanding, not really know what's going on or what to expect. Someone has a different view. They understand the reasons for change but may disagree with them, or they may think they have a better plan. Or they prefer things as they are. They don't like change. So looking at that passage in 1 Samuel 17, Saul's reaction demonstrates classic self-interest and disbelief, holding on to what he knows best and what he trusts in. And Goliath's reaction, taunting, ridiculing David, resistance, preferring things like they are. Change takes guts. It takes courage. But it also takes wisdom. And in our context, takes a lot of faith to step out boldly from pre-existing expectations, that old armor, and do something different or something new. And we need to have confidence in the God of heaven's armies to deliver those results. See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? Isaiah 43. Stuart Murray in his book goes on to challenge churches to develop a new attitude, a new outlook, a new understanding, suited to their real location in society today. And how much does this apply to us here and now? When Jesus sent out the 72, 2 by 2, in Luke 10, and when he commissioned his disciples in Matthew 28, he didn't instruct them to go out and replicate the institutional, law-laden synagogue structures and invite people into them. He sent them out into the community to live with and witness to people and share the good news through their living out of their lives. If that minority-style Christian community had continued to grow without the entrapment of that institutional majority endorsement and that pressurized conversions that it engendered over the centuries to follow, it might have moved more slowly, but it would certainly have been more authentic and much less oppressive majority than it turned out to be. If the church had followed the same model that Jesus initiated by walking and talking and living with people and the model the new church set out in the book of Acts, living with, loving one another, caring for and looking after one another. If the church had followed that model, rather than the "you're not good enough to sit in our pew or conform to our way of doing things" model, how different would the church be today? So hankering for the past, or having a reluctance to embrace the purposes of God in the present, even the Israelites thought that they had it better back in Egypt under slavery after being in the wilderness for some time. In Exodus 16, they reminisced about the old days of slavery, where they said that we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted, but you, God, have brought us into this desert to kill us all with this hunger. Even they thought of the good old days in slavery as better than where they were. So can we consider that we find ourselves on a threshold, a sort of liminal space? It's an unsettling time when we're tempted to hang on to things that we've done in the past, those traditions, those practices, how we were brought up, what we thought we believed. And we're now being courageously embracing a new paradigm with new possibilities. This minority status that we find ourselves in, similar to how David was considered in that story, stepping up to fight Goliath, is different to what's been done in the past. It's different to what's expected. But it was filled with faith. Pick up your stones and your sling, what's appropriate for this situation, and step out in faith. So I'm going to leave you with a final question. If you want to chat to your neighbor, do so by all means, but feel free just to think to yourself. We talked earlier about what's holding us back. If you or we as a church weren't so laden down with that old ill-fitting armor, what could you do, or what could we do in our Christian lives and witness? What possibilities would that open up? What new things could we do? So I'll leave you with that thought for a few minutes before Jenny comes up. Thank you.